This production uses a human for narration.
The year was 1992. Cassette tapes still hissed in battered Walkmans, payphones were lifelines, and the world outside felt far away. Elias Grant stepped off a battered floatplane at a nameless gravel strip deep in the Yukon territory, northern Canada, where the forest pressed against the water like it was hungry. He was 38, lean and weathered, with storm grey eyes and scars that didn't come from city life. His thick South African accent had softened after years drifting through Northern America, but the habits from the 32nd Battalion, or the Buffalo Battalion, had not. Those years in the Angolan bush, during the border war, had taught him how to move like a ghost, how to listen when the trees lied, and how to kill without hesitation when the dark came alive. He had come here chasing silence after his wife walked out. Photography was his excuse. Survival was the truth. Lena Vos arrived on the same flight, clutching a sketchbook and a backpack that looked too heavy for her wiry frame. 34, dark hair twisted in a messy knot, eyes that had seen too many hospital rooms and not enough sun. She was fleeing Toronto after burying her younger brother. Another needle, another quiet funeral. The Yukon was supposed to be raw enough to drown the guilt she felt. She noticed Elias immediately because he scanned the tree line the way soldiers do, not tourists. The other 5 passengers were already gathering at the tiny outpost shack. Tom McRae, the grizzled local guide in his late 40s, ex-logger with a beard like steel wool and a voice rough from years of shutting over chainsaws. Becky Lynn, 22, bright-eyed university student on a summer adventure, camera around her neck and optimism in every step. Derek and Clara Holt, a married couple from Vancouver in their early 40s. He loud and barrel-chested, she quiet and fragile-looking, always smoothing her hands over her arms as if cold. Victor Hale, 69, retired botanist from Calgary, with a white beard and a soft voice that murmured Latin names to the ferns like old friends. Tom checked their permits under the weak, late summer sun. 7 days, loop trail through the hollow, old growth, black spruce, tundra edges. Stay on the blazers. Cell phones are useless up here. Don't even bother. And if you hear your name called after dark, do not answer. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. The locals called this stretch the Hollow for a reason. Stories went back to the gold rush, men vanishing, search parties finding only boots arranged neatly with teeth inside. They set off at dawn the next morning, boots crunching on frost-rimmed gravel. The air smelled of pine resin and distant snow. Conversation stayed easy at first, Derek boasting about his construction business, Becky asking Victor about rare orchids, Clara nodding politely. Elias fell into step beside Lena without planning it. She asked about the battered lycra around his neck. He asked about the ink stain on her fingers from sketching. Their words felt like the first warm breath after a long freeze. By afternoon, the trail narrowed. Black spruce closed in, branches interlocking overhead like woven fingers. Moss swallowed every footstep. The compost Tom carried began to drift lazily, needles swinging as if drunk. No one mentioned it aloud. They made camp beside a silent black stream that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced wrong. Victor told stories while they ate freeze-dried stew that tasted of cardboard. Tales of trappers who walked out speaking in voices not their own. A 1950 survey team that found their own footprints leading deeper into the woods, weeks old. The Hollow remembers, Victor said softly, poking the fire. It learns what you miss most. Lena shivered. Elias shifted closer on the log, offering shoulder warmth without touching. She accepted it. Their knees brushed. Neither pulled away. The first whisper came just after midnight. Elias woke sharp, the way 32 Battalion had trained him. Silent, hand already reaching for the knife he kept strapped to his boot, even on civilian hikes. His name, soft and intimate, breathed right against his ear in his ex-wife's voice. "Eli, come find me. I never stopped loving you." He sat up, heart steady but skin crawling. The fire had burned low, tents zipped tight. Across the circle, Lena's flap twitched. She was watching him through the gap, eyes wide. He nodded once, she nodded back. Shared silence felt safer than words. Morning brought fog so thick it clung like wet wool, muffling voices and turning the trees into grey sentinels. The orange trailblazers had vanished overnight. Bark where they should have been was smooth and unmarked, as if the forest had healed itself. Tom cursed under his breath and insisted they push on forward, up the stream. Victor agreed, eyes bright with unnatural excitement. "The orchids bloom deeper in. I can feel them." They voted, majority ruled. Victor wandered ahead that afternoon, chasing a pale bloom he swore he'd seen in the mist. They heard him call out once, joyful, "Margaret, darling, look," his dead wife's name. Then nothing. When they caught up with him, he stood upright against an ancient spruce, arms spread as if in welcome. Bark had grown over his wrists and ankles, seamless, knitting flesh into wood. His eyes were gone, replaced by wet, black knots of fungus that glistened. His mouth smiled wide, showing every tooth, and roots had begun threading delicately between his ribs like possessive fingers. The air smelled of rot sweetened with lilacs. Margaret's favorite. Becky screamed until her voice cracked. Derek vomited into the ferns. Tom tried to cut the body free with his knife. The bark tore like skin, leaking clear sap that burned where it touched. They piled rocks over what remained. No one spoke the obvious. Victor's final call had sounded exactly like his wife, though she had died in a Calgary hospital years earlier. That night, the whispers multiplied. They came from every direction at once. Children laughing, mothers scolding, lovers promising eternity. Perfect imitations. Clara heard her childhood golden retriever barking frantically, the one that had been hit by a car when she was 10. Derek heard his father's drunken bellow, "Worthless little shit, you'll never amount to anything." Becky heard her little sister drowned at summer camp when Becky was 12, whispering, "Why didn't you jump in after me?" Tom heard his logging partner from a 1987 clear cut, the one crushed under a widowmaker tree, gurgling his name through blood. Elias heard his wife again, closer, seductive. "Eli, I'm waiting just beyond the ridge. We can start over." Lena heard her brother, clear voice and sober for the first time in memory. "Sis, come home, I'm clean now. We'll fix everything." They huddled together by the fire, backs pressed together. Elias found Lena's hand in the dark. She gripped it hard enough to leave marks. In the shared terror, something fragile sparked, trust born of raw need. Later, when the others pretended to sleep, they whispered truths. He told her about the Angolan bush in the 1980s, 32 battalion operations, long-range recce patrols, silent movement through enemy territory, nights when the bush itself seemed alive with unseen threats. How you learn to trust only your squad and your gut. She told him about holding her brother's hand in the ER, how he had smiled and lied that he was finally done with the needle. Their confessions peeled away layers. When Lena's voice broke, Elias brushed a tear from her cheek with calloused thumb. She leaned in. Their first kiss tasted of salt, of wood smoke, and the metallic edge of fear. It was desperate, but it was alive. The forest noticed the new bond. The whispers turned jealous, cruel. They called Elias in Lena's voice, begging him to abandon her. They called Lena in Elias's voice, promising safety if she just left the soldier behind. Day 3. The forest stopped pretending. Trees leaned when unobserved, roots rearranging overnight, creating false paths that looped back onto themselves. Time slipped. Watchers lost hours while the pale sun barely moved. Becky's sketchbook filled with drawings she didn't remember making. 7 stick figures walking into a mouth formed of interlocking branches, eyes blinking from knotholes. Clara went next. She had been drifting, humming her mother's lullaby under her breath all morning. At a rest stop, she stood suddenly, smiled with eerie serenity, and walked straight into a thicket of Devil's Club. Thorns ripped her jacket and skin. She kept walking as if caressed. They chased, shouting. When they reached her, she was halfway inside a hollow fallen log. Legs kicking once, twice, then still. Thick pale vines had erupted from her mouth, nostrils and ears, pulsing gently like veins. They had to saw them with Tom's knife to drag her out. Even after her heart stopped, the vines kept growing, flowering tiny white blossoms that smelled exactly like Clara's faded perfume. Derek snapped. He raged at the trees, swinging his trekking pole until it splintered, screaming accusations that they were all in on the same nightmare joke. That night he tried to slip away alone. Compost clutched like a talisman, headlamp carving desperate tunnels through the fog. They found the headlamp the next morning, still glowing, dangling from a branch 15 feet up. Derek's body lay beneath it, spine folded backward in an impossible arc, vertebrae pressing against skin like white piano keys. His mouth was crammed full of pine needles, packed so tightly it looked as if the forest had force-fed him while he was screaming. 4 gone, 3 left. Tom's face had aged decades. His voice was raw. Becky moved like a sleepwalker, pupils dilated. Elias and Lena now shared a tent every night, not for romance alone, but for the simple proof of another living heartbeat. They made love once in the trembling dark, quiet and fierce, a defiance against the devouring silence. Afterward, Elias held her and murmured old 32 battalion tricks, how to move without breaking twigs, how to read wind direction for scent, how to stay calm when the bush whispers lies. The thing out here feeds on fear and memory, he told her. Starve it, give it nothing it can use. The forest answered with Becky's disappearance on the 4th night. Her tent was empty at dawn, sleeping bag still body warm. Footprints led 30 yards into the spruce and stopped dead at the base of a colossal hemlock. High in the branches fluttered her sketchbook, pages impaled on broken twigs. Every drawing showed the group dissolving, one by one, into the dark. The final page held neat handwriting. It wants the ones who still believe they can leave. The soldier knows better. They burned that book. Flames turned sickly green and smelled of funeral lilies. Tom led them toward an old fire lookout tower marked on his faded topographical map. Perhaps a radio, high ground, something the trees couldn't swallow. The climb was brutal. Roots clutched at ankles like skeletal hands. Fog poured uphill in slow white rivers. Elias moved like the soldier he once was, quiet, scanning constantly, knife loose in its sheath. He taught Lena how to step where he stepped, how to listen past the whispers.
They reached the tower as the weak sun bled orange. Rusted steel and splintered wood, wrapped in living vines thick as arteries. Inside, a single chair faced the window overlooking endless grey-green. On the chair lay binoculars crusted with moss. Tom picked them up eagerly. There, I see the river, the plain strip, we're close. He never lowered them. Lena stepped nearer and saw the lenses were empty black voids, ringed with tiny tooth-like marks. Tom's hands were already fusing with the rubber eye cups, bark creeping under his nails. He smiled, Victor's smile. Go, he rasped. Don't answer it. The hollow can't follow if you starve it of belief. Then he stepped backwards through the opened window. He never lowered them. Lena stepped nearer and saw the lenses were empty black voids, ringed with tiny tooth-like marks. Tom's hands were already fusing with the rubber eye cups, bark creeping under his nails. He smiled Victor's smile. Go, he rasped. Don't answer it. The hollow can't follow you if you starve it of belief. Then he stepped backwards through the open window. The fall was long, the impact was soft, followed by the wet, settling sound of earth claiming what was left. 2 left. Elias and Lena ran. The forest unleashed everything. Trees crashed down seconds after they passed underneath them. Whispers became a chorus of every voice they had ever loved, screaming betrayal. Lena, he'll leave you like your brother did. Elias, she's weak. She'll slow you down like your wife did. Branches whipped like lashes. Roots erupted, tripping. The air grew thick, hard to breathe, carrying the sense of their own decaying futures. But Elias was 32 Battalion. He had survived night in the Angolan bush where unseen enemies moved like smoke, where fear could kill faster than bullets. He kept them moving at night when the things seemed strongest, using the cold to sharpen his mind. He taught Lena to breathe shallow, to focus only on the next step, to treat the voices like enemy propaganda. Lies meant to break the morale. When a root snared her ankle and began dragging her backward into a hollow, he didn't hesitate. His knife flashed, severing the pulsing vine in one clean motion. Black sap sprayed, hissing where it had hit the ground. He pulled her up, pressed his forehead to hers for one fierce second. "We starved," he whispered, "together." Their love grew in the crucible, not soft romance, but something forged. Two broken people choosing each other over the easy surrender the forest offered. In snatched moments of rest, they spoke of futures beyond the trees, a small cabin somewhere with light, sketches on the walls, photographs developing in a dark room. They made love again under a boulder while the whispers howled, bodies moving in desperate rhythm, a declaration that they were still alive, still choosing. On the sixth night, the entity showed its true face. They had holed up in a shallow cave, fire small and smokeless the way Elias knew how. The whispers coalesced into something physical, pale shapes moving just beyond the firelight, wearing the faces of the dead. Victor with fungus eyes, smiling, Clara blooming vines from her throat, Derek folded backwards, Becky waving her sketchbook, Tom staring through the black-lensed binoculars. Behind them all, something taller, indistinct, wearing the forest itself, branches for limbs, moss for skin, a mouth like a split trunk lined with teeth of splintered wood. It spoke in a voice that was all of them and none of them. "Give us the woman, the soldier we know. He has danced with the dark before. But she is soft, she is innocent. She will feed us for years." Elias stood, knife in one hand, the other gripping Lena's. From his back he pulled the last flare. Tom had carried. 1992 tech, bright magnesium. He had saved it. "Run when I say," he told her quietly. Then he stepped forward, voice steady with the calm of old battles. "You won't believe? Yes, mine. We are leaving. You are nothing but wind and memory. Starve, motherfucker." He fired the flare straight into the entity's maw. White light exploding, searing. The thing shrieked, a sound like every tree in the hollow splitting at once. Branches thrashed wildly. The pale figures dissolved into mist. They ran. The forest convulsed. Trees toppled in chains. The ground heaved. But Elias moved like the elite operator he had been and still is, reading the chaos, finding the weak lines, pulling Lena through the gaps that closed behind them. She matched his pace. Fear burned away into fierce determination. They no longer answered any voice. They spoke only to each other. Dawn broke on the seventh day with unnatural suddenness. The fog tore apart. They stumbled onto an old seismic line, straight as a razor, cutting through the trees toward the river. Behind them, the hollow screamed once more, then fell into a silence deeper than any before. They followed the line. Hours later, they heard the drone of a float plane searching. The emergency beacon Tom had activated days earlier finally reaching someone. Or perhaps the forest simply releasing what it could no longer hold. The plane spotted them. They were airlifted out, filthy, hollow-eyed, but alive. In the years that followed, Elias and Lena stayed together. They built a quiet life in the British Columbia coast, far from the deep interior. He developed film in a small darkroom. She filled canvases with careful, defiant light breaking through the trees. Sometimes at night, the whispers returned in dreams, soft but tempting, but they had held each other and refused to answer. The hollow never forgot them, but they have starved it of the only thing it truly needed, their surrender. And in the trauma that should have broken them, they had found something the forest could never claim. A love tempered in terror, strong enough to walk out of the dark, carrying each other home.